Hello, welcome to day 2 of the work in progress. So here we are with our scene again, and we are still painting the animation. So let's get started on that. So there's our scene there. Let's see, we'll bring this down where you can see it again. Let's see, I believe we want to go to, let's see, 100%, and bring this up and hope it's going to stop moving. I keep forgetting that I have it set on that painting cycle thing, and it's going to, oh, let's see, let's try that. Let's see if that makes us happier. That is, okay. It likes the hand instead of the shift hand. I notice that every program has its own little quirks. You get used to them over. The Storyboard Pro doesn't mind if you use the shift bar and the hand, but the shift bar will automatically give you the hand that will allow you to move the screen. But Rough Animator seems to like its own hand, and that's the little hand that's over here that I'm waving my mouse around. If you click on that, it takes over that function, and it's happier using that for this program than the shift bar, which gives you the same thing, but the shift bar is outside of what's written into the Rough Animator program, evidently. So it likes it likes its own function. All right, so we'll stop here and let's see. We need to add. We've only painted 3 frames out of this 28 here. So let's add another frame up here to add frame, add after, which gives us a blank frame. Our onion skin doesn't need to be on for this because we have our layer 1, which is the animation, at 36%. Thus, that allows us to be able to see through that layer enough to be able to ink it. I'll need to bring up my reference, which is, let's see, let's pull that up. Yep, there we go. There's my reference footage, and I discovered the, whoops, oh, I don't want that. I want you, okay. Yeah, my reference footage, this is the color model that I have. Incidentally, if you're wondering what they're painting, oops, I lost it. Went down underneath again. Where is it? Where are you? There you go. Back up. Yeah, I have. The kids are painting. What they're painting is a sign. It's that sign, which is the title of this thing that I'm making. So you'll see that each one of them, I think I'm going to have 2 scenes with each character painting something that will add up to what this frame is. And you'll see, I may show you at a point when I'm editing it together how this all plays together. So let me move this. Let's see. So I'm going to go back to that, and I'm going to move this over on the side here where I can, I'll be able to see it, you won't. Yeah, I just need to be able to see it myself, so let's see. Let's see here, yeah, make that smaller. Okay. Yeah, or I can put it on that side. Let's see. This side or that side. I'll put it over here. Okay. All right, then. Let's fit this back to the window again. Okay. All right, so let's see. All right, that's right. Miguel has a solid black line with the exception of the red paint. So that's going to be on everything except the red painted area. Let's see, are we working behind it? We are. Okay. Yes. All right. These scenes are kind of short. I've sort of in my head timed out how long I think the scenes should be, but because since I want to um, have a series of scenes that are going to add up to this title sequence, the scenes can be short. They can be, you know, the way I'm going about it by making each scene roughly about a little over a second long. Because almost all of the scenes I've done, I think, have been about 28 to 30 some frames in length. And that seems to be working pretty well. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's a formula, so I wouldn't, in other words, I wouldn't say, oh, okay, if you do a scene that's 28 frames, that's the right length. I think you have to kind of have an intuition about it. I've animated for so long that I sort of have a sixth sense about how much time something should be on the screen. We're trained, or we have been trained to, we've been trained to be able to, over time, to be able to sort of sense what 24 frames looks like or what it feels like. And that's a tremendous advantage, because when you first start animating, you really don't have any idea of what 24 frames feels like, or any amount of screen time feels like. It isn't until you've done a lot of animation and messed up a lot that you start to sort of get a sense of, oh, okay, I think that's what 3 frames looks like. That's what 5 frames feels like, and and that's just the truth, and there isn't really any way for you to know until you try it, until you do it. That's just the way it is. I mean, it'd be like playing music, I would think. I took some music classes, but from what I could tell is that musicians do have an ear for what they do. There's a sensation. A lot of them will talk about how they feel something when they're playing it. Well, I think it's the same thing with anything that you get good at. When you're driving, for instance, you get to a point where you kind of have a synchronization between your foot pedals and your steering wheel and gears you have to shift and stuff. And that's not something that you get automatically. It's not something that happens to you the first time you do it or the 5th time you do it. Today, there's a lot of emphasis on how quickly you can do something and how, you can have this in 10 days or whatever. Well, that's not to say that you can't have a quick way of doing something. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that we all make is thinking that there's shortcuts to everything. And there are just some things that there are no shortcuts to. Now, this is where I think AI is fooling people into thinking that they can just use that and that they don't have to do any more thinking anymore. They don't have to do any more anything anymore. They just let the AI do it. And I believe that the AI is proving that it can do a lot of very clever, cool things, because it clearly can. But you've got to ask yourself, are you interested in letting the machine do everything for you where you have no human participation at all? What happens if that machine fails? What happens when, it's not working? Then what are you going to do? So you would probably want to at least have some kind of knowledge to fill in the gap when something doesn't work. I would think. It would seem to me that it would be wisdom to not put yourself in that place. So now we're going to paint bucket stuff. Um, so really, that is important. It's important that um, that you know how things work, so that you can make some decisions and not be at the mercy of a machine making all of your decisions for you. So there you go. For what that's worth, um, I in speaking about AI, I would say that I think AI could be an excellent tool for independent animators, and I think we just haven't figured out exactly how to use it in the best way yet. But I certainly think it's a great tool. I have never been one to be afraid of new computer digital tools because I think some of them are really amazing. And I definitely say, yeah, let's use anything that'll help us do our job more efficiently. That just makes a lot of sense to me. I would just say, yeah, of course. You've got to, um, you should do that. I don't know why you wouldn't want to do it. Let's see. Uh, Black line. It is easier when it's bigger. It just is. It is difficult, I think, to see when something is moving. It's also difficult to see the mistakes. You can. It doesn't mean that you just don't try hard to not make mistakes, but it's just to say that it's chances are you're not going to see the mistakes as easily um, when it's moving, especially if it's moving fast. If something is moving slowly, coming to a stop or something in the movement, then you're going to be more likely to see mistakes either in the painting or in the drawing or cleaning up or whatever. Because your hand is not going to be completely um, perfect on a move. It's like your hand. You try to, I mean, how often do you try to draw something in a straight line and your hand shakes just a little bit? Mine's doing that now. And not a lot, but it's not enough that you could see it, I think, in the movement when it's animating. I think you probably wouldn't notice it, but it definitely is happening. Now I'm choosing a fairly thick line here too. That's another thing. That thick line ensures that the paint is going to be behind it, so I don't have to worry about that. You know. Yeah, it is better to use the hand symbol in the program. I'm learning stuff about programs all the time. There's programs. Everybody writes programs so differently. So, yeah. I'm just amazed at what sometimes when things are moving fast, what you can get away with. You just stuff you don't see. My mentor, Richard Williams, God rest his soul, mentioned this when he was working on The Thief about how you don't notice. He of course he was a real stickler for details, but he talked about how when something is moving fast, you don't see certain inconsistencies. But that he never stressed that you don't do the work. He was very much a stickler on things being perfect it. You know, if you had a certain number of fingers on a character, you know, you were expected to make sure you kept that consistent from throughout all the drawings. So, you know, he was certainly not encouraging anybody to slack off and do a bad job. You know, he always um, made it a point that, you know, yeah, you need to be paying attention to the quality and making sure that you get a nice, smooth, consistent image, keeping things on model to the degree that you can. You know, what's nice with the digital formats is you are able to copy and paste. You know, like if you're moving a head around in a scene, and you can just copy and paste the head instead of having to trace it for the in between like we used to do in the old days when we had to do everything by hand. Well, that's, you know, clearly a lot easier than trying to just do it by hand. You can do it by hand if you want to. That's great. But when you stop and think about it, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense to do it by hand if all you had to do is just copy paste. You could just copy paste the you know, you could copy paste the heads, get them in the right spot, right, and you're good. You know, so it doesn't even make sense to do work you don't need to do. It's easier to, let's see, it's the purple one. I always, a lot of times I have to flip back to the previous drawing to make sure that whichever color in the palette I'm picking is the right one. Yeah, and that's the. After a while, also too, I kind of get to remember like where it is in the palette, so that I am getting the right color. When you don't have a lot of colors that you have to deal with, that's also nicer, because then you don't have to. You kind of remember like, oh, it's this color next to this one, you know, and you play it. And I also like to play it a lot like that, so that I can see um, what I've already done. Yeah. Back to add a drawing, add after. All right. Go back to 250 size. Use the hand, bring it over. I generally also like doing the faces first when I'm doing everything, because it's such a meticulous thing. I guess in the doing these heads, I could probably copy paste even the head with color, but I think there's something about, I mean, copying the drawings for lines is probably better than copying them for color. In other words, like let's say you've colored a head and it's kind of just like the one you're about to do. You could just copy that head completely with color in it and everything. You could probably do that. I haven't tried it. Though one thing I notice about copying stuff is the quality of the copy, you know, isn't going to be. I notice that it's not always so good sometimes, the copy. Now, on a clean line, I don't know, to be honest with you. I generally like doing these things by hand like this, because I think they come out of a hand cleanup like this a lot better. They seem to be more concise, and the line seems to be more consistent. So I haven't really done it where I've just copied the you know, a previous head, for instance, without, you know, just copying it, you know, purely. I'm a little bit uncertain about doing that. There's part of me that thinks that maybe that's not going to look so good, or maybe the copy will break up a little bit and it won't be consistent. There's a part of me that doesn't like to be too lazy. Some stuff will help, you know, because you don't maybe necessarily notice it so well. Let's see here, that little glitch right there with the line going up just above that other line. Let's erase that out. Yeah, there we go. I like to let my hand kind of sweep around in an action too. If I'm making a line, I think I've mentioned this in earlier videos where you kind of start your line and you try to move your hand as consistently as you can through that line as you make it. Once again, easier said than done. Obviously, over time, you get accustomed to doing this and it gets easier as you do it. So I've always said that, once again, I don't think there's shortcuts to do anything well. This is just the experience of a person who's been doing it. Obviously take that with a grain of salt. If you've got something that's making your life easy, then by all means use it. Far be it from me to tell you that you don't have a way of working that's working great for you and it's doing great. Well, here's another thing too. I don't know why I haven't used this. Down here at the very bottom, this little squiggly line here, if you press on it, it gives you straight lines. So I could take this straight line here and draw a straight line. Like that. Instead of doing it, by hand. And it's going to be a lot straighter than anything I can do. Yeah, see? Well, that's fine. And then I can... but again, then I'm going to have to remember to go back to the little squiggly line so that I know that it's a hand-drawn line. See? So you can do that. It makes sense to do it for, a line that's like long, like the one that I did first. So, it makes sense to do that. Let's see. And then underneath the eye. See, even underneath the eye, that line might be better if it's straight. So, like, let's say we do that underneath the eye. It might be better to use that, see? But you got to make sure you go back to that little squiggly line so that you know that now that's your, your hand-drawn line. All right, so I've got the hair, face, hands, lips, shirt, which I believe is right. It's this color here. It's the shirt. This is the pants. And then the red for the paint. Alright. Check it. Yeah, that's right. Very good. I mentioned that I'm not putting there's no background behind this because everything's going to be against white. So it's intentionally, I'm not coloring in the eyes because there's not going to be the background. Okay, so let's see how we doing time-wise. Oh, not bad. All right, let's see. Probably need time for at least another one. Let's see. Okay. This is the black. Got our squiggly line. Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of things that you don't see. You wouldn't see certain mistakes because something is moving so quickly. We're all going to be different about this. Once again, I would say this to the artist, any artist, be as much of a stickler for details as you feel comfortable being. I consider myself a stickler for details. However, over the years, I have sort of come to the conclusion since animation for me, the results that I have gotten have been satisfactory enough for me that I understand now where to pick my battles, what I want to be fastidious about and what I don't care about. Um, so, you know, and that changes from project to project, you know. There'll be some projects where I'll say, oh, you know, I'm just really going to be real picky about what I want to have happen and how I want it to happen and so on and so forth. And then there's other projects where I loosen up a little bit, you know, as I see the results of the thing. And I go, oh, okay, well, that's working pretty good, or I don't need to be too fastidious about, you know. So, why am I saying that? Well, because it's just true, you know. Even in some of Disney's greatest films, there are mistakes. I remember when I first started to work for Disney, and you know, we would Disney feature animation back in the day. I was at Disney's in the late '70s in the feature department in the late '70s, early '80s. We were working on the Fox and the Hound and the Black Cauldron and Mickey's Christmas Carol. There were several films that we were working on. And I would say we were all pretty fastidious artists in the sense that we were all very interested in doing the very best we could because, after all, we're working at Disney, right? And I remember that Eric Larson, who was our mentor, who trained most of us who worked there in the training program, would have a weekly, I believe it was a weekly, screening of some Disney film, some old Disney feature film. And I remember, you know, just going to the screening rooms to watch these things, and they were just awesome to see on a big screen. And I remember a lot of the artists uh, looking for mistakes in the animation, and they would point them out, you know, a lot of times very vocally. You know, it used to really irritate me because I really love the old, you know, feature films. And I would think to myself, why are they doing that? But you know what was cool about it, I will say, is that it made me realize that, like, yeah, I guess there are mistakes. You know, I never really thought about it that much. But if I'm going to be honest with myself, it's like, yeah, there are mistakes in this stuff. And yeah, I just never really, you know, I never really thought about it before. But then, you know, I realized that, well, you know what? That it didn't take anything away from the film for me. I mean, maybe it did for some of my friends, people who were there in the audience watching it. Maybe it bothered them. I don't know. But I got to thinking about that. Well, this is just. Oh, I'm got the wrong color there. This is just human nature. You're going to have mistakes and things. And, you know, it's just that's just the way it is. It's like human beings are not perfect. We're gonna make mistakes. It's just the way it is. And I think maybe what it did for me. See, I think I put this on the top, so I'll go over that line. Yeah. I think what it did for me was it sort of also made me feel kind of better about if something wasn't perfect. I don't know if that makes any sense. But it sort of made me feel like, okay, well, you know, things don't have to be perfect. Let's be honest. We're not, none of us are perfect, so we're going to make mistakes. And I think that sort of in some ways maybe caused me to relax a little bit because it sort of put everything in perspective. I'm putting this behind now, see that? It put everything in perspective. It made me think, remind me that human beings are imperfect and that even the very best um, quality films that we grow up with, that we love, might have mistakes in them. And that was, it was frustrating at first, but it was kind of sobering because it really did kind of make me go like, yeah, you know what, that's really true. They're not wrong about what they're saying. I've got a thought here about underneath the shirt, because see, I'm showing the underneath part of the shirt here. Oh gosh, I didn't finish that red line over there. See that? Is it behind? Yeah, it is. Okay, so it doesn't matter. There we go. So, should I go with a darker... Well, if I did, what would it be? Well, it could be black, or it could be brown, couldn't it? I could take this brown color and put it on the under... You all aren't seeing what I'm talking about here. Let me, let's see here. Let me do it this way. Okay. I'm talking about these little areas in here. I'm going to make that darker. I'm going to use this brown color here to make that darker, just so that it pops out a little bit. Yeah. And now that I got the shoe out there, so you can't see the shoe now on Miguel, his shoe is a gray, it looks like a gray and a black. Yeah. So let's see. We'll go with this gray here for the body of the shoe. And then we'll go with black for the rims in there. Because I think his shoe is only on screen for just a brief moment. Yeah, okay. Alright. And then we got the red. And then, how are we doing time-wise? Yeah, we should stop now. Let's see. Where's the hand? There we go. Well, let's see. Let's pull this up. We'll do, I think, right? Just a hand. And play. Well, we still got a few frames. We've got, it looks like about 7 more frames to paint, and then we'll be done with this scene. Huh. Hoo-ha. Well, that's looking pretty nice. Yeah. Almost done. All right, folks. Hey. All right, I'm content with the way things are going here. So this is looking pretty good. All right, well, I will see you guys tomorrow. You have a nice evening, what's left of it. And remember, thank God for the skills and the talents that he's blessed you with, whatever those may be. Jesus is Lord.